How's it going, middle schoolers and high schoolers? I hope you're doing well. I have for us tonight Isaiah 52, 13, starting at verse 13 to 53, verse 12. Now, before we get into this, you need to know we are about to read what is the most contested passage in the Old Testament. Quite seriously, we are about to read a passage it's another servant song. However, there is a variety and they're very opposite about how to read this. So we're going to read a passage that, in all honesty, some of the people who I know who are Jewish have never read this passage. And in some sense, because there are some places of worship that avoid this passage because some people think it points that directly at Jesus. So this passage is famous because in Christian interpretation and history, we retroactively look back and see this is absolutely about Jesus. So I'm going to read it for you, all right? And I'm using this hefty commentary that's really been helping me for our conversations. I'm going to read it, and then I really only have one question for you at the very end of this, okay? So in this time, I'm inviting you to be an expert, a scholar. Now, some of you may not think that you're on par or ready for this, but I don't believe that. I think all of you are intelligent and far more wise than maybe some of you even realize, certainly more than some of you use. However, certainly more than you realize. I'm going to read this passage. You listen, and you'll eventually see why this is such a powerful passage. Ready? Starting at verse 13 in chapter 52. Behold, my servant will prosper, be exalted, lifted up, and raised to great heights. Just as there are many appalled at him, so marred was his appearance, unlike that of man, and his form hardly human. It means he was beat up. So he will startle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him, for what they were not told they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? This is where it gets really interesting. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of arid or dry ground. He had no form or beauty that we should look at him, no charm that we could find attractive. He was despised and shunned by everyone, a man of suffering, familiar with disease. Like one from whom people hid their faces, he was despised, and we held him in no regard. Surely it was our sickness he bore, and our sufferings he carried. Yet we regarded him as plagued, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was wounded because of our sins. He was bruised for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. That's a famous line. We have all gone astray like sheep, each going his own way. And the Lord laid on him the guilt of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb being led to slaughter, or like a sheep silent before her shearers, he did not open his mouth. Through oppressive judgment he was taken away, but from his generation who considered? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the sin of my people he received the blow. And they made his grave among the wicked, and with the rich in his death, although he had done no violence, nor had he spoken anything false. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him and afflict him with sickness. When his life serves as a compensation for guilt, he will see offspring and have long life. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hands. From the agony of his soul he will see, and he shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he will bear their sins. This is the last verse. Therefore, I will give him a position among the many, and he will divide the spoil with the great, because he poured out his life to death and was numbered among the sinners, because he bore the sin of many and made intercession for sinners. That's amazing, isn't it? This passage, like I said, is one of the most contested, because according to what you bring to this passage, you could see that it's definitely about Jesus, or you might try to fight that it's not about Jesus, but it's really hard to not see this as about the life and the suffering of Jesus, maybe even his mission. So here's the question I have for you, okay? I'll put this aside. When we read passages like this, we have to remember a few things. One, it was written for a particular time, people, place, problem, right? However, it maybe says something true that echoes down history, and maybe even that's how we should see some prophecies. They actually are true multiple times, multiple generations, but this one seems to be like it hits its big resonance when we come to Jesus. Now, here's the thought though. This passage was in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, which we know Jesus read. So it's possible Jesus was very aware of Isaiah 52 to 53, where we just read. My question to you is, yes, today there's lots of scholars and there's lots of people, conservative and liberal, Christian and non-Christian, who debate about whether or not this passage is about Jesus or not about Jesus. My question for you: do you think Jesus knew this passage was about him? So regardless, okay, yes, scholars, not scholars, people in church, people not go to church, Christians, non-Christians, everybody has their own opinion about whether or not this passage is about Jesus. Do you think Jesus thinks this passage is about Jesus? Because maybe Jesus didn't know at the start of his ministry, but maybe as time went on, and maybe certainly towards the end, as he was beaten and flogged and then crucified, dead and buried, maybe at some point in the midst of all of that, he actually did remember this passage. But we don't know exactly what crossed through his mind in the last hours, not all of what he was thinking at least. So if you're able, comment to this and say whether or not you think Jesus knew this passage was about him, okay? And that's the way I like to draw you into a passage, is to try to ask a different question than what everyone else is asking. So, once again, you're all intelligent. All of you are brilliant. I fully believe many of you could be pastors and biblical scholars and theologians. That's why I like to talk to you about this stuff on this level. So, thank you for checking this out. And as always, man, may grace and peace be with you, okay? We'll catch you later.